Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the third and final section of Chapter 8. In this final section, we have four little subtopics to look at. And the first two topics are why is the marginal cost curve U-shaped? And second topic is why is the average variable cost curve U-shaped? Then we look at the formula for calculating break-even quantity. Break-even quantity is a quantity of output where net income is zero. You break even, you have zero profits and zero losses. And then the final section deals with the long-run average total cost curve. So the first of these topics is why is the marginal cost curve U-shaped? So first we're going to take a look at the diagram that shows that the marginal cost curve in fact is U-shaped. Okay, so we've already seen these curves before. Here's the marginal cost curve, here's the average variable cost curve, and we mentioned before the marginal cost curve intersects the average variable cost curve at the minimum point of the average variable cost curve. And we can just see from these illustrations that these two curves are U-shaped. So the question is, why is that? And I hate to say it's a bit complicated, but it is a bit complicated. So what we've seen so far, we've calculated the marginal cost by calculating the change in total costs divided by the change in output. But it just so happens that there's another formula for calculating the marginal cost, and there's another formula for calculating the average variable cost. So instead of using total variable cost divided by total output, there's another formula. And when we use this second formula for calculating the marginal cost and the average variable cost, and then we plot the data, we can easily see that these curves are U-shaped. So what is this second formula? So for the marginal cost calculation, it's marginal cost equals, it's the per unit input cost divided by marginal physical product. And for the average variable cost curve, it is per unit input cost divided by average physical product. So in this slide, we're creating this data table, and on the column number 5 and column number 6 here, we have the average variable cost and the marginal cost. And so these data points are the ones that we saw plotted on that diagram, on that chart just a minute ago. I don't want to go back there because I'll lose my. Oh no, I won't. I can do that. So these data points. Over these units of output give us these costs give us these curves right here on the on the right-hand side. So if you're looking at this slide in your book and you're wondering where do these figures come from, we simply apply this formula up here. It's the per unit input cost divided by marginal physical product. So we can see in this data table, we have the marginal physical product right here. So we'll use this to calculate this, and we have the average physical product data here, which we'll use to calculate the average variable cost here. So the formula is, so there's an assumption. There's an assumption. In this illustration, in this example, the per unit input costs, so our inputs that we're using is labor, and the per unit input, per unit labor cost is $5. It's like $5 an hour. So when we take 5 and we divide it by this marginal physical product figure of 8 here, 5 divided by 8 equals 0.63. There might be some rounding. Okay, and then how do we get the figure of 0.31? It's $5 divided by the marginal physical product figure of 16. That gives us 0.31. For the next one, it's $5 divided by marginal physical product of 15. That gives us 33. Next one is 5 divided by 13, gives us 38. 13 gives us 38, and so on. So similarly, to calculate these average variable cost figures here, we take the per unit input cost, so $5 an hour, it's $5 per hour, divided by the average physical product, which is 8. That gives us 63 cents. Then we get $5 divided by 12. That gives us about 42 cents. Then it's $5 divided by 13. And that gives us 38 cents. $5 divided by 13, 38, and so on. So then when we calculate this table of data and we plot it, we see that the, oh, it's a big mess. Anyways, we see that the marginal cost curve and the average variable cost curve are U-shaped. And what we see, and it is a little bit hard to see here, but what we see is when the marginal physical product is, I'm going to go to a slightly different color here. When the marginal physical product is increasing, oops, the marginal cost is decreasing. And when the marginal physical product is decreasing, the marginal cost is decreasing. And we'll see the mathematical formula here in just a second to kind of, and you'll see it intuitively. So likewise, when the average physical product is increasing, the average variable cost is decreasing. And when the average physical product is decreasing, the average variable cost is increasing. So we can see that the U-shape of the marginal cost curve and the average variable cost curve is tied to the behavior of the marginal physical product and the average physical product. And we can see this more clearly when we when we see the formulas. Okay, so we have, to calculate marginal cost, we have two formulas. Formula number 1, which is the one that we looked at in the first half of this chapter. Marginal cost is change in total cost divided by change in total output. And then formula number 2 is the one that we've just looked at here. Marginal cost equals, it's a per unit input cost divided by marginal physical product. So in the examples that we're illustrating here, we're using labor as our input. and labor comes in units of hours, and it costs so many dollars per hour. So the dollars per hour is the wage rate, which is represented by W. So we can see, just a second here, we can see intuitively, let me just clear that. We can see intuitively if the wage rate is $5 an hour, obviously this is a very old example, if the denominator increases, then the result is going to decrease. So if marginal physical product increases, the marginal cost is going to decrease. And likewise, when the marginal physical product is decreasing, the marginal cost is going to increase. And so we can see just by sort of playing around a number here, or just imagining what the denominator is, when our wage rate is fixed, when our per unit input price is unchanged at $5, we can see that the marginal cost is going to decrease and then increase as we vary the marginal physical product. And the same principle applies to explain the U-shape of the average variable cost curve. So again, we have two formulas for the average variable cost. We have formula number one that we looked at in the first half of today. So average variable cost is simply total variable cost divided by total output. Or formula number two, it's the per unit input price divided by average physical product. So again, in our example here, we're using labor as the input, and we're saying the price of labor is $5 per hour. So if W is 5 and it stays at 5, we can see intuitively that if we increase the denominator, the average variable cost is going to decline. And if we decrease the denominator, then average variable cost is going to increase. So we can just see there that we can see exactly what we saw in this diagram back here, that as the marginal physical product, increases, marginal costs decline, and as marginal physical product declines, marginal costs increase, and then likewise as average physical product increases, average variable costs decline, and as average physical product declines, average variable costs increase. A little bit convoluted, I have to admit. I kind of like the original formulas myself, but this does explain why the marginal cost and average variable cost curves are U-shaped. Okay, so this final little next little section deals with the so-called break-even analysis, and we'll come back to this in marketing class, and we'll come back to this in math class. Businesses are often interested in knowing their revenue level at which they quote-unquote break even. So break even is the point where the business has zero profits. It has no positive profits and it has no loss. It's simply net income equals zero. So the formula for this, I mean, there are several formulas and they're all equivalent, but the formula that we have in this book is the break-even quantity of output equals our total fixed cost, otherwise known as our overhead, divided by, so the way it's phrased in this book, it's price minus average variable cost. But you may know from elsewhere that this is the markup per unit. Or if you like Alex's terminology, I call it the gross margin per unit. Or I'm even happy with contribution margin per unit. So simply, so remember we have price minus cost equals markup, all on a per unit basis. Well, this markup here is the denominator. It is the denominator. So anyways, it's a handy little formula if you want to know at what point, at what quantity of output does the firm have net income equal to 0? It's overhead divided by contribution margin per unit, or markup per unit. Anyways, we'll come back to this in math class for sure, and in marketing class next term. Okay, so the final section of the chapter deals with the long run average total cost curve, and that's what we'll go to next. So long run average total cost curve. I'm just gonna move this up. Oops, there we go. Okay, long run average total cost curve. So as we mentioned earlier, in the short run is defined by at least one input is incapable of being changed. But in the long run, every input or every factor of production is changeable. So if we were a manufacturing company and we wanted to determine the optimal size of our plant, we could model all these different plants of different sizes and calculate the short-term average cost curve for each one of these plants. And if we came up with an infinite number of these plant sizes based on incremental units of output, then we would come up with an infinite number of short-run average total cost curves. In the long-run average total cost curve is simply the line that's drawn tangent. It's simply the line that's drawn tangent to all these short-run average cost curves corresponding to plants of different sizes. So here we have a quantity of output. You know, we want to make a plant to manufacture vehicles. So how many vehicles do we want to produce per year? Well, we could have, 300,000 vehicles, we could have 400,000 vehicles, 500,000 vehicles, 600,000, and of course we could go 400,000, 400,001, 400,002, 400,003, and so on. And we could come up with a short-run average total cost curve corresponding to each one of those plant sizes. And so when we do that for a very large number of plant sizes over this very large output range, we sometimes see that the long-run average total cost curve is U-shaped. So the long-run average total cost curve is simply the line that is tangent to each one of these short-run average cost curves. But when we see this diagram, we have to realize the long-run average cost curve does not touch the minimum point on these short-run average cost curves, except for the short-run average cost curve that's at the very bottom of this U shape. For these other short-run cost curves, it touches slightly on the side. Okay, so if we're a manufacturing company and we want to know what optimal size of plant we should build, we might come up with our long run. We might create all these models of all these plant sizes of increasing sizes, calculate all these short-run average cost curves, and then draw this long-run average cost curve that's tangent or touching all the short-run curves. So when the firm wants to pick its optimal plant size, it picks the plant size whose short-run average cost curve is at a minimum point. Is at a minimum point. That's supposed to be the minimum point. I don't think it is, but anyways, it's at a minimum point at the target quantity of output. So if we want to produce this many hundred thousands of vehicles per year, we would pick a plant having this short-run average cost curve, not this one here, because our average total costs are going to be lower with this plant rather than that plant. Yes, we can still produce in this plant, but our average costs are going to be higher. And of course, we're in business, our job is to maximize our profits, and we maximize our profits when the difference between revenues and total costs are minimized. Okay. So when we look at the long-run average cost curve, so in this illustration here, we have a U-shaped long-run average cost curve. So we're just going to look at some additional properties of this. Okay, so why is the long-run average cost curve, why is it U-shaped? Long-run average cost curve. So the short-run average cost curve is also U-shaped, but they're U-shaped for different reasons. The short-run average cost curve is U-shaped due to diminishing marginal returns. But the long-run marginal cost curve is U-shaped for other reasons. And the reasons are the plant having so-called economies of scale. And so we can have increasing economies of scale, constant economies of scale, or decreasing economies of scale. So in the downward slope section of the long-run average cost curve, so in this section here, in the downward slope section, the long-run average cost curve declines. This means that as the size of the plant increases, its long-run average costs decline. So that's a positive thing. That encourages companies to build large-sized plants. So the question is, why does the long-run average cost curve, or why can it decrease? So we have three reasons. We have three reasons. One is, as the scale of a business increases, in certain businesses, there are greater opportunities to have specialized inputs, to have specialized resources. So as our company increases in size, as our level of output increases, we can afford specialized labor. So we can imagine, if you had a small airplane company, you were flying people, you might start off as a one-man show. You do everything. You book the tickets, you fly the plane, you do the maintenance. But if you increase the number of planes in your fleet, then you would end up hiring different number of pilots, specialized people to fly the planes. You would hire specialized people to do the bookings and to look after the customers. You would hire mechanics. So we would have these benefits of having these specialized workers. And as we have specialized workers, our costs will decline. And likewise, we'll end up with, as we grow in size, we'll use more specialized equipment, and the more specialized equipment is probably going to be more efficient than at smaller sizes. And then the second reason we can have economies of scale. So as our plant size increases, our long-run average total costs decline. We can have positive economies of scale due to this so-called dimension factor. So it means that as we increase our productive capacity, our input quantities don't scale directly to output quantities. It's not a one-to-one relationship between inputs and outputs. It's more like inputs are a fraction of the output. And so we have some examples of this. So I think these are from the book. One example is with trains. So you have trains, you have a locomotive, and then you have a bunch of cars getting hauled by the one locomotive. If you add an extra car to the train, you probably don't have to have an extra locomotive. So if you don't have to have the extra locomotive, you don't have to um, spend all that much money on this expensive piece of equipment. And another example is factories that have unused capacity. So you've got a plant that's this big, and right today you're only using 60% of it. So you can increase your output without actually having to um, increase your building size. You already have this equipment sitting over here. You already have the building, so you can increase your quantity of output without having to increase the scale of your plant. You've already got the plant size there. Okay, and then the third reason we can have economies of scale is as we grow in size, companies can afford to use increasingly productive equipment. So if you're a small company, let's say you're a small sawmill, you can produce so many thousands of board feet of lumber per day. Whereas if you're a great big sawmill, you can produce millions of board feet of lumber per day, and your saws run much faster. So the mere fact that you're large means you can afford more productive equipment, and as your productivity increases, your long-run average costs are going to decline. Okay, so next we're going to look at the flat section of the long-run average cost curve. Okay, so remember here's our long-run average cost curve here. Kind of looks, it's U-shaped. We looked at the downward section where we have increasing economies of scale. Then we have a section where we have so-called constant economies of scale. So it means that as the potential plant size increases, our long-run average costs stay constant. And so we'll come back to this in a minute, talking about the minimum efficient scale. But anyways, there can be a section of the long-run average cost curve where even if we increase the size of our plant, we don't have any positive economies of scale, and we don't have any negative ones either. It's just constant. Okay. Then the next little section deals with the final range of the long-run average cost curve. So we have the increasing economies of scale here. We have constant economies of scale here. And then we can get to a size where as we increase the size of our plant, our long-run average cost curve, our long-run average costs actually increase. And these are known as diseconomies of scale. And this is not as uncommon as it might sound. One example is there are limits to management efficiency. If you have a business and you have a number of workers and you have, let's say you have one manager supervising the whole crew. If you add one more manager, adding that manager is not going to necessarily make your crew more productive. So as we increase our costs by adding overhead, by adding more and more managers, the more we expend on increasing our capacity, because they're capable of managing more people, but they in fact don't. As we kind of build this empire, as we kind of build bureaucracy, then as our output capacity increases, our long-run average costs also increase, and so we have diseconomies of scale. Okay, and then the final little section deals with the so-called minimum efficient scale. So we kind of have to go. We have to go backwards here to the. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so we have to go backwards here. So here's our long-run average cost curve. Here we have increasing economies of scale. Here we have decreasing economies of scale. And then we have constant economies of scale in the center. So this means that as our potential plant size increases, our average total costs do not change. And so we have this concept of the minimum efficient scale, which is the level of output where the constant economies of scale begin. So if we had a choice between if this was our long-run average cost curve, and we had a choice between building a plant that had a capacity of 1,000 units per year versus only 10 units per year, we would pick the one at only 10 units per year, because we knew that if we increased our plant size even further, our average total cost curve, our average total costs are not going to decline. So this concept of minimum efficient scale is the lowest level of output at which the long-run average total cost curve, the long-run average total costs are minimized. And it kind of means that larger sized operations have no cost advantage over smaller sized operations. And sort of the final point about this minimum efficient scale is it can be used to measure the degree of competition in an industry. If the minimum efficient scale is relatively large, then there are likely going to be a few competitors in the industry, because there aren't going to be that many people that can come in the industry and produce at this output level. So a good example of this is probably in the airline manufacturing industry. You know, there are only a few large aircraft manufacturers in the world. In the United States, there's Boeing, and in Europe, there's Airbus, and then in Brazil, there's Embraer, and in Montreal, there's Bombardier, but Embraer and or how do you pronounce it, and Bombardier are nowhere near the same size as Boeing and Airbus. But Boeing and Airbus are kind of like in this area here. So the minimum efficient scale, I should say, the minimum efficient scale for Airbus and Boeing is relatively large, and so there's relatively few competitors. Whereas if the minimum efficient scale is relatively small, then more people can afford to operate in the industry, and you'll have a whole bunch of producers all at the minimum efficient scale. So this is kind of like the restaurant industry in any particular town. Towns tend to have a relatively high number of restaurants. Why? Because it's not that costly to get into the industry and to kind of reach this minimum efficient scale point. Okay, so that's it for chapter 8. And that's it for today. We're done. Talk to you later. Oops, first.